Today we are continuing our series of the Jesus questions, which brings us today to Luke chapter 6, beginning with verse 46. And right out of the gate, Jesus asks us the question, "Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and don't do what I say?" Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and don't do what I say? Thank goodness he was talking to them and not us, right? I'll show you what it's like when somebody comes to me, hears my words, and puts them into practice. It's like a person building a house by digging deep and laying the foundation on bedrock. When the flood came, the rise water smashed against that house, but the water couldn't shake the house because it was well built. But those who don't put into practice what they hear are like a person who built a house without a foundation. The floodwater smashed against it and collapsed instantly. It collapsed instantly. It was completely destroyed. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. So in certain parts of the world, there's a geological phenomenon that builders need to pay attention to. It's called liquefaction. Liquefaction. In places where there are earthquakes, there are certain conditions where there is so much moisture in the soil and a certain degree of violent shaking in the earth that the soil that had previously appeared solid literally turns into sinking sand. And so whatever's been built upon it that seemed to be built on a good foundation sinks and is destroyed. Right? So it gives the appearance, the soil gives the appearance of stability, but under the right conditions of shaking becomes unstable, right? Okay, you follow? Well, that's not just true in geological situations. That's true in some people's lives. That there's people in the world that give the appearance that everything in their life is perfectly stable. Stable in their career, stable in their investments, stable in their connections, their reputation, the appearance that their family is good and strong and stable. But when the storms come, when the earthquake shakes, and I don't mean that literally, you understand what I mean, right? That sometimes challenges come in life that were unexpected. When things start shaking, things start sinking. And all the image, the facade of stability is shown for what it is. And friends, I'm not just talking about those people out there. Right? Sometimes it's us. That we seem to have it all together. We profess a certain belief. We go to church. We go to worship, right? But in reality, when the storms come, and let's be honest, being a Christian does not protect us from the storms. Jesus said rain falls on the good and the bad. That sometimes, even for us, that though we have professed a certain Christian faith, the reality is our foundations are not nearly as strong as they need to be to withstand the challenges of life. Now, Jesus understood this very well. Oftentimes, Jesus drew huge crowds, but we deceive ourselves if we think everybody in the crowd was a faithful follower of Jesus, right? There were all kinds of people attracted to Jesus, curious about him, right? Some were truly seeking. They end up having their lives transformed and became his followers or his disciples. Some were just curious, right? Jesus did interesting things, miracles, and he said things that were new, and people, are drawn to crowds. They want to see what's going on. Some desperately needed help, right? So they came for healing, but they would have gone to anyone, right? He's just the most recent miracle worker. Let's go see what he can do. Some were admirers, meaning, I'll look from afar, but don't get too close. Some were genuinely interested, but they couldn't handle the commitment, like the rich young ruler. Right? He couldn't deal with it. Some were offended and turned away. Some, it just wasn't what they were looking for. And some, like the Pharisees, were there just to criticize, just to find ammunition against him. Well, Jesus was fully aware of this, that always people listening to him, there were mixed motives. And so one day he asked the crowd the question we already heard, "Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and don't do what I say?" You notice that? They've called him Lord, right? But not all who call Jesus Lord mean it. I mean, there are some that were just saying it as a means of kind of formal respect. Others were doing it in a manipulative way. They wanted something from Jesus. Some were there to follow Jesus, but on their terms, right? Their desire was for Jesus to conform his agenda to their agenda, not vice versa. You ever done that? Jesus, I need you to do what I want to do. Quit telling me what you want me to do. We sang a song a few minutes ago, change me, come and change me. Really? Really? Change me? Is that really what we want? I mean, the truth is that not everybody who comes in search of Jesus is ready to become his disciple, to conform their lives to him, to do what he says. That was true then, and it's true now. And so Jesus confronts the motivation. Jesus asks the question, why do you call me Lord, Lord, but you don't do what I say? Dallas Willard says, plainly in the eyes of Jesus, there's no good reason for not doing what he said to do, for he only tells us to do what is best. And he goes on to define, this is what a disciple actually is. It's not just somebody who says they believe something. Disciples of Jesus are people who do not just profess certain views as their own, but by applying their growing understanding of life and the kingdom of the heavens to every aspect of their life on earth. In other words, our faith isn't reserved for just Sunday mornings. It's not just reserved for those moments that feel more spiritual. To be a disciple means to be a disciple all the time. To call Jesus Lord means he's Lord of everything. Really, to be a disciple of Jesus is how we demonstrate our beliefs, both through our verbal affirmation, but also in our application, in the action, the way that we live. There's an expression, either Jesus is Lord of all or not at all. He really doesn't give us a middle ground. In fact, in Revelation, he says you're neither hot or cold, right? He expects one or the other. So then Jesus goes on and tells a story. He gives a very simple metaphor. He says, why is it you call me Lord, Lord, but you don't do what I say? Let me tell you that's like. So we read, he says, I'll show you what it's like when someone comes to me, hears my words, and puts them into practice. It's like a person building a house by digging deep and laying the foundation on bedrock. And then he contrasts it with the other guy who built the house on sand, right? Storm comes for both. The ground shakes for both. One house remains standing and the other doesn't. But the metaphor there is, did you catch it? Anyone who hears my teaching and puts them into practice, that's like building a house on a strong foundation. Now, Jesus tells the same story in Luke and the Gospel of Matthew. The Gospel of Matthew tells one little difference, and it's just one word. The word is wise. We're going to spend a little time with wisdom today. Matthew 7:24. Everybody, Jesus says, who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise builder who built a house on the rock. Notice there's two parts to this. Listening to Jesus, anyone who hears these words of mine, listening to Jesus and acts on them, who puts them in action, actually does something with them. It's about listening and doing. Foolishness is just listening and then going on about my life. Oh yeah, I heard Jesus said that, but I'm just going to go do what I want to do, or what seems practical to do, or what my friends are doing, or what I was taught to do by my family, or what seems appropriate in my profession. That's what I'll do. I'll listen to Jesus, but I don't intend to do what he says. Jesus says, no. Wisdom is listening to what I say and doing what I say, putting it into practice, acting upon it. That's the wise thing to do. I'll say more about wisdom in just a moment. Now, we just had a big storm go by, right? Dorian. Devastation in other places. We got spared. But, there for a week, we just kept hearing about what could happen to the coast. They kept talking about beach erosion. In previous storms, there have been Irma and Matthew, big-time beach erosion. And so you've probably seen the pictures, right, of these great, beach properties that are worth millions of dollars, that people pay lots and lots of money to keep or to rent. And then along comes a storm, and the waves pound at it, and the tides come in, and it washes away the foundation. And so what happens? This incredibly valuable piece of property has to be torn down. It's not safe. It goes from being quite valuable to having no valuable, to actually being a liability. Well, let that be a metaphor for us. Let that be a metaphor. And I want to say to you today, I mean, I ride a motorcycle. I like going up on A1A. I love seeing all these houses, right? I have yet to see one as valuable as you. Some are worth millions of dollars. I have yet to see a structure built along the coast of Florida as valuable as you. I'm much less concerned about one of those beach houses being condemned or washed into the sea than I am about your life and my life being compromised because we have a sandy, weak foundation. Now, that's easy to say for me. I don't own one of those houses, but you get the point, right? What have you built your life on? A solid foundation of hearing what Jesus says and doing it, or on a foundation of sand? I'm going to read you 3 passages of Scripture in rapid fire. I want you to look for the word do. Notice the prevalence of the word do. Do is an action word. James 2:14. My brothers and sisters, what good is it if people say they have faith, but do nothing to show it? The prophet Micah asked, with what should I approach the Lord and bow down before God on high? He's about his worship. Micah 6:8. He has told you what is good and what the Lord requires from you. To do justice, it's an action word. Embrace faithful love. Walk humbly with God. Even Jesus on another occasion, Matthew 7:21. Not everybody who says to me, Lord, Lord, will get into the kingdom of heaven. Only those who, what? Do the will of my Father who is in heaven will enter. It's about how we take what he teaches and make it a practice in our lives. You say, why do you call me Lord, Lord, but not do? Why do you listen to what I'm teaching you but not put it into practice? A great example of this, I just think is funny, is you know the city, St. Augustine. It's named for a person, St. Augustine. That's if you ever read it, St. Augustine. And St. Augustine wrote a book called The Confessions. And he tells a story that early in his life, he was increasingly drawn to a life of faith, increasingly attracted to Christ. He also really liked the ladies and liked to live a bit of a promiscuous lifestyle. And so he confesses in his book, The Confessions, that one time he prayed, God grant me chastity, but not yet. Anybody ever prayed a prayer like that? Oh God, I want to be your disciple, but not yet. Or God, help me to forgive this person who's hurt me so much, but not yet. I'm enjoying the anger. Right? Or God, I want to do something great for you. I want to serve you. I want to go do something great in the world. Maybe when I retire, not yet. Or God, I want to give a big fat check to the church, but not yet. I got some other things I want to buy first. Right? Authentic faith is not a not yet faith. It's a doing faith. It's an acting upon it. It's not just about best intentions. It's about best practices. So we return back to this word wise. Remember, Jesus said, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a what kind of builder? A wise builder who built a house on bedrock. So if you think about the word wisdom for a minute, when we think about wisdom, a lot of times we're really thinking kind of head stuff. Like if you think about the people you think are wise, they just seem to be really smart. They seem to have had a lot of experience. They seem to have learned from life. They seem to have really good advice, right? But when the Bible talks about wisdom, it's that and more. The wisdom in the Bible is really a gift of God. It has a lot more to do with discernment. And it's a lot less theoretical than sometimes the way we talk about wisdom. It's a lot less philosophical. Really, biblical wisdom has everything to do with how you act in life, how you make a decision about what to do. It's about right action. So Jesus says the wise person heard what I said and then built a house on a foundation, that it's listening and doing. Proverbs, do not forsake wisdom, for she will protect you. Love her, and she will watch over you. So we've talked a lot about knowing, listening to Jesus, and then doing what he says it seems pretty incredibly important that we know what he said to do, right? That we actually wrap our minds around. These are the things he actually said for us to do. So we can spend a lot of time on this, but let me just give you a quick little summary. This particular passage appears in a teaching called sometimes the Sermon on the Mount. It appears in both Matthew and Luke. Luke, we call it the Sermon on the Plain. That doesn't matter. It's just one sermon. Just in one message, here's what Jesus said to do. He says, do good deeds. Let your light so shine before God and men that they will see your good deeds and give glory to your Father in heaven. It tells us to love our enemies. That's hard. It tells us to be sexually faithful. Not to seek vengeance when somebody does us wrong. To forgive as we've been forgiven. To give to the poor. To pray. Not to store up earthly treasures where moth eats and rust destroys. He says, don't worry. Don't worry about what you wear or what you eat. I'll provide it. To seek first his kingdom. Make it your number one priority. Don't judge others. Don't judge that guy who has a speck in his eye because you got a log in yours. Avoid hypocrisy. Now, we could go on and read all the Gospels. There's lots and lots of commands. Add to that all the commands of the Old Testament. By the way, we like to think, oh, that's Old Testament stuff, this commandment stuff. Jesus said, I didn't come to change one jot or tittle of the law. That's his phrase. He didn't come to change any of it. But rather, one day he was asked, what's the most important law? You know this, right? What's the number one commandment? He said, well, there is one. And in fact, it summarizes all of the commandments. It's this, one commandment. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, your soul, your strength. That means the whole of our being, right? Our entire lives, our resting, our working, our playing, our worshiping. It's all God's. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And, same commandment, love your neighbor as you love yourself. And then one day somebody wanted some clarity, like, who's my neighbor? Remember he tells the story about the Good Samaritan? They hated Samaritans. Somebody that helps someone in need. That's how you live out the great commandment. Jesus said there is no greater commandment than to love. Karl Rahner was a Catholic mystic who said, Christian faith is of the conviction that only love for God and human beings, which is more than a commandment and an obligatory exercise, brings human beings to salvation. Only love for God and human beings brings us to salvation. It has the conviction that this love is the meaning of the whole of the law and the prophets. There's a preacher by the name of William Sloane Coffin who said, too many religious people make faith their aim. They think the greatest of these is faith. And faith is defined as all but infallible doctrine. These are the dogmatic, divisive Christians, more concerned with freezing the doctrine than warming the heart. I love that expression. Freezing the doctrine than warming the heart. He's referring to 1 Corinthians 13, where he talks about love. Love is patient, love is kind, love is never arrogant, boastful, or rude. It ends with saying that there are three things remaining: faith, hope, and love. Clearly, faith is important, hope is important. But he says the greatest of these is love, right? Faith, in a lot of ways, is about our convictions. That matters. Love is about our action. The Bible never talks about love in this kind of ushy-gushy, sentimental way. It's always about, what do I do? The greatest example of love is Jesus on the cross. There's no greater love than this, Jesus said, that a man laid down his life for his friends. That's how we live this out. So I want you to see how Jesus brings this full circle. He says, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and not do what I say? Right? Then it talks about wisdom. Wisdom is about putting this into action. Then another time, well, what's the most important thing that I do? Love. Well, then follow this. John, this is the Gospel of John, 15:14. If you love me, read it with me, you will keep my commandments. How do we demonstrate our love for Jesus? By doing what he told us to do. And we might turn it the other way and say, when I willfully choose not to do what he told me to do, what am I communicating to Jesus? Maybe I don't love him nearly as much as I say I do. Jesus says, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and don't do what I say? Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and not love the people I love? Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and love your money and possessions more than you love me? Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and look down your nose at people I've made in my own image and likeness, died for? Why do you call me Lord, Lord, but only call on me when when you're really desperate? Why do you call me Lord, Lord, but just only put me in your life when it's convenient? Why do you call me Lord, Lord, but dismiss my teachings when they seem impractical in 2019? Why do you call me Lord, Lord, yet demonstrate so little faith and so much fear? Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and steal my tithe from me? Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and chase after every conceivable man-made idol? Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and care so little about justice? Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and know so little of what I taught? Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and live by the world's values instead of mine, and look so much like the world instead of me? Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and ignore so much of what I've taught you? So, after the storm or after an earthquake, oftentimes they bring in the experts, the inspectors. They come. They got to look at the foundation, right? They got to make sure before anybody moves back into this building, it's safe. Is this a safe structure or not? It all has to do with did the foundation hold? And if not, then what? It's condemned. It's condemned. I just want you to imagine the inspectors coming to look. It's taking a good look at your foundation. What would the inspectors see? Is it strong or is it weak? Any soft spots? Any sandy spots? Or is it built on the one we call Lord, Lord? Because we've listened to his word. We've put it into action. How's your foundation? Let's pray. Lord, we confess to you that there's not a one of us in this room, whose foundations are as strong as they need to be, could be, should be, as we want them to be. And Lord, doing what you said, though, is hard sometimes. Living different than the world is hard. Being consistent is hard, Lord. So help us. Lord, where we fall short, would you cement us with your grace? Where we fall short, Lord, would you prop us up? When we fall short, Lord, would you be our rock? Lord, convict us today, stir us today, challenge us today to know more of what you say, to seek what you say, to want to know what you say, and to do it. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Let's stand, let's sing.